Welcome to episode 23 of the Actual Astronomy Podcast. I'm Chris, and I'm speaking with
Shane.
Hey Shane. How's it going today? We're going to talk about some astro photos for fun.
Yeah. Easy astrophotography is what I like to refer to it as.
Right.
Um, Astrophotography is a beautiful thing, and there's a lot of people that get into it and do a great job with it. But, the photos that you see in magazines and often posted on the internet require a pretty big investment in time and equipment. And by equipment, that equals dollars. Um, I'm not about any of that when it comes to astrophotography. I'm about the easiest, simplest, most cost-effective way possible. So, to set the record straight, I am primarily a visual observer, and I dabble a little bit in astrophotography, and I'll talk about some of that stuff today.
Yeah, but you've made. I mean, you say that, and I guess I would agree with it. But you've taken some really pretty shots, like the shot that actually both the images that are used on our podcast Podbean page. You took that's correct, isn't it?
Yeah. So our little logo of the moon, I captured that photo a while ago. And then along the top of the Podbean page, or even on our Twitter account, there's a little bit of the Milky Way. And that's another one that one I captured down in the grasslands on one of our trips.
And those are beautiful shots. Like, anybody who looks at those might assume that these are stock photos that maybe we borrowed or lifted somewhere, but sort of in keeping with the show, we're about actually doing the stuff that we're talking about. And so you've taken these, and I'm not an astrophotographer really at all whatsoever. I've only taken a few dozen astro images. But when I get into astronomy, I really, really just wanted to learn the stars and constellations so I could shoot great astro photos and put them on the wall and like impress my friends and everything.
And how did that work out?
It 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 worked out okay. So I knew some people who were photographers at the time, like really good photographers. One of them, I believe, is a professional photographer now. And so they were able to guide me along. My cousin Will, who does our music, keeps saying he's gonna do another bit of music for us, which would be awesome. He is an amazing photographer, filmographer, documentary maker. But yeah, so they kind of guided me in the right direction, and I built one of these, what's called a barn door tracker, which is usually a manual mount that you have like two pieces of plywood or whatever. They're kind of like in a bit of a sandwich, and then you have a screw and a thing that you turn every 15 seconds to kind of track the sky. So I had built one of these with my friends who knew a lot more about photography than I did. I went and bought, this was like just back when digital cameras were really coming out, and they were way too expensive for me to afford when I was in university. So I bought like one of the old film cameras, and at that time it was difficult to even get film, but I thought this would be a great way to start because I can get a really good, the best film camera that people had been using in the past decade for astro photos. I was able to get one for like $100 or $150, and all the film I could shoot for like $50 or something. So I got started that way. But I really was a little bit underwhelmed with my photos. I was able to get constellations and nebulas and the Milky Way and stuff, but what I didn't like was kind of looking down and messing with stuff while all this astronomy could be had. And I didn't really do any astronomy when I was taking these photos. But the thing that I noticed about the way that you do it, which I quite like, and I've observed with a few other people that do this as well, is you folks are able to set it up. You don't really set it and forget it, like you have a timer or whatever, and you kind of come back and do some observing, and your images they're taking place while we're actually doing some astronomy. And so for me, I find it really cool because you were taking that photo while we were observing that part of the sky, and that's really cool.
Yeah. There's something kind of special about that. Um, when you're capturing some photos of objects that you're looking at, maybe through another telescope or with binoculars, it's kind of fun. And I like the multitasking aspect of it. Although I will say, and I think I mentioned it before on a podcast, that when we go out observing, particularly down to a dark sky location like grasslands, we're there for a minimum of 2 nights and sometimes a maximum of 2 nights. Um, one night, I won't take out the camera at all. I want that to be 100% me and my telescope or me and my binoculars, and allow my eyes to get fully dark adapted and stay there.
Yeah.
If you're going to do any kind of photography, you're going to impact your dark adapted eyes a little bit at some point, or maybe even at multiple points throughout the night. So, I kind of, the second night, or the night that I'm doing the astrophotography, I've accepted the fact that it probably won't be my best visual night, but I'll get a little bit of both in throughout the course of the evening.
Yeah, it's neat though. It's really a lot of fun to kind of get home and then have you send us those photos, or to see them online or whatever. I really enjoy that aspect of it. It's very, very cool. I'm glad I'm not doing it though, because there are a few things that you need to do this. So you're not doing photos through a telescope though. That's correct, isn't it?
That is correct. I've done a little bit of that in my backyard, but the astrophotography that I typically do is, wide field to maybe medium field. A lot of wide field stuff in the grasslands, particularly of the Milky Way. But I've also done like some constellation shots, some Northern Lights stuff. And I think this, assuming we can get there towards the end of this summer, I would like to use some longer focal length lenses to photograph like the Andromeda Galaxy.
You should try sorry, not to get off in too much of a tangent here, but you should see if you can get your camera hooked to my TAC FS60.
Yeah, that's light enough that my little tracking mount might be able to handle it.
Yeah, it just weighs whatever it is, 3 pounds. So
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I would love that. I would love to have a photo taken through my little telescope.
Oh, yeah, we'll have to figure that out.
Yeah, that would be cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
When we do these podcasts, I sit here like sort of on my desk. I have that TAC 60 and my Prima Luce rings and a bunch of other stuff. That I like to look at while I'm working during the day. It kind of is a nice atmosphere to work in amongst all my Astro gear. So
yeah, lots of squirrels for distraction.
yeah, exactly.
Right on. So maybe another point too, when I talk about easy astrophotography, I want it to be like low impact in terms of the gear needed. And then anybody that does astrophotography, there's two main components. There's the acquisition. So you're out in the field taking the photos, but then you can spend a lot of time at a computer editing these photos and adjusting all sorts of levels to make them as good as possible. Both of those areas, I try to do as little as possible. I really just like the raw image out of the camera with minimal editing, because I just don't want to spend a lot of time doing it. So that'll be the focus of today. And what's neat about this approach is it's very accessible to a lot of people. You don't need specialized gear. Probably a lot of the stuff that you have in your house already, you'll be able to take out and utilize it for some astrophotography.
Yeah,
So
I like that approach. I went to a talk by Peter Saravolo. It might have just been last summer, maybe a couple summers ago. And he was talking about that, about how, sometimes, and there's nothing wrong with it. People will, although his argument might have been a little bit more down that road. But, it's kind of like, in my mind anyway, it's like the achromat versus apochromat. So an achromat has some color to it, and the apochromat is essentially color free. But a lot of achromats give you beautiful images of the planets. They just have a little bit of color. And
yeah,
it's
for sure.
the same kind of thing with the astrophotos. Like it's an astrophoto. It should look like what it is, and not become like this post-production piece of art all the time. It's nice just to see what you're actually doing. Like, what is that camera and that sky condition at that time producing exactly, right?
Yeah. And just to give people an idea of what it takes to produce, the images that you see in books and magazines, um, oftentimes to get like a nebula that's full of, the beautiful reds and all sorts of different colors and structure, Some of those photos can be 15 hours of acquisition time,
Yeah.
meaning the photographer had a camera attached to a telescope for 15 hours of combined time gathering light from the sky and building these images. The one that I have in front of me, which people can look up online, is Barnard's Loop and M78, all in the same frame. The one that I'm looking at, the photographer took 78 photos, and the exposure lengths of each photo varied from 10 to 15 minutes.
Wow.
Then they take those 78 photos to a computer. They stack them using software. So, put them basically like layers on top of each other. And then they do all sorts of adjusting of the image, adjusting levels and all sorts of things. The end result is incredible. It's beautiful art, and it's quite fascinating, but it's a huge investment of time. And then on top of that, they'll likely have specialized camera gear that is made for the night sky and really doesn't work for anything else. You'll typically have a very expensive telescope, but the most important part of all of this is your mount. You have to have a perfectly tracking mount that can handle the load of the telescope and the camera, and a good astrophotography setup, where you want to take, say, these magazine quality images. You're in the thousands of dollars for an imaging setup like that. If you want to take really beautiful shots of, say, the planets, how a lot of people do that is with video, and then they'll extract the frames from the video to build the final image. So it's not uncommon to have like 12,000 frames of one planet. If you're shooting, say, 60 frames per second of video, I'm not sure how much time that is, but you'll get thousands and thousands of frames. Then you run it through software, where the software will choose, say, the 40% best frames, and then you stack those, you adjust colors and all. What I'm getting at is there's a lot involved there. And again, I'll stop talking about that and I'll start talking about the easy astrophotography that really doesn't involve all of that stuff. But I think it's important to have a short conversation about some of those complexities, because I think when some people get involved with astronomy, they want to take those types of photos, and they might buy a $500 telescope thinking they can achieve those, and you probably won't. And that's just a reality of what's required to accomplish some of those great astrophotos.
So what is the easiest way to get started in astrophotography, Shane?
Well, a cell phone. Let's start there.
Okay.
If we pretty much all have cell phones, and I'll talk about kind of real basic cell phone photos, but I think even cell phone cameras now are really evolving and becoming quite phenomenal. So you might even be able to go beyond what I'm about to say, but the moon is a very easy object to photograph with a cell phone. If you're out at a public stargazing night where there's telescopes, you can try holding your phone camera up to the eyepiece. And this gets to be a little bit tricky, to get the right focus and distance, but you can take photographs that way, just kind of projecting through the eyepiece. But there's another phenomena that probably suits cell phone cameras even better, and I don't think we've talked about it yet on the podcast, and that's capturing the belt of Venus.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah. What have you ever photographed that? I know you've seen it a million times.
I've never photographed that, but what the belt of Venus is, if I can just maybe give a brief explanation, is this is the shadow of space, or the shadow of the Earth cutting through its atmosphere as it travels out into space. And you see this at sunrise and sunset, or just after sunset in the evenings. Now, it almost looks like a bruising of the sky. It kind of starts as sort of a pinkish tone with a slight amount of purple, and then it gradually gets darker and darker. And so if you're looking towards the east after sunset, you want to look opposite the sun, and you can often see this if it's totally clear, and then it will slowly rise up and darken.
Yeah, it's quite pretty. So I'm sure many people have seen it and just admired the beautiful colors. But what you're seeing is the shadow of Earth cast into the atmosphere. Essentially, it's beautiful, and with a cell phone you can capture that. Now, some people would say, "Come on, Shane, that's not really astrophotography." Um, but I think anytime you're capturing
It's
sky phenomena of any kind, I'd like to view that as astrophotography.
Yeah, it's an astronomical event. Like you're seeing the shadow of Earth cast into space. In the right conditions, you can see this, and you can see a lunar eclipse at the same time, of course.
Yeah.
Um, it's that same type of phenomena. So, it's the idea that we are on a planet that's going around the sun. It's in space, and what you're doing there is astronomically related. So, what else could somebody take a photo of using a cell phone?
Well, that might be about it.
What
I
about the
guess.
moon through an eyepiece? I've
Oh
done that
yeah,
before, but with a slightly different kind of CCD camera.
yeah. Either the moon or planets through a telescope eyepiece, you can certainly do. If it's nebula or galaxies,
Yeah, that's gonna be
they're pretty dim, and I'm not sure that a cell phone would pick that up very well. But yeah, certainly Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the moon, all of that is possible.
yeah. Cool.
Um, Now, kind of moving away from cell phones because they are certainly limited, I'll move on to like what is commonly referred to as a DSLR camera. Many people own them. Those are the cameras with the lenses that you can often change. But what is nice about those cameras is you can basically put it into full manual mode, which I really recommend for astrophotography, because you're going to have to adjust all of those settings on, well, not all of them, but a number of settings on the camera so that it does capture proper astrophotos. The way these cameras are designed is to function during the day. And so when you put it into like an automatic mode, it just doesn't work for astronomy, because it's not meant to hold the lens open for a long period of time to gather photons and things of that nature.
So what are
So
you? Sorry to interrupt, but I'm just curious. Are you using one of these DSLRs? I thought your camera was a little bit different somehow.
yeah, so there's DSLRs are like a bigger camera. I'm using a mirrorless camera, so it's different design and construction than a DSLR, but you still have like full manual control. The thing that I like about the mirrorless cameras is they are much smaller and lighter. So when it comes to mounting these things, whether on any kind of tripod or even just packing it with my gear, they're so much smaller and lighter that it makes all of that easier.
Yeah.
So I quite like it. So the one that I use is nothing super expensive. It's a Sony A6000. In fact, it's quite a few years old. But just to give people an idea again of what you need, and it's not a lot. You can get into this for probably the camera that you have in the closet right now. So maybe to just set the stage a little bit too to what we're trying to do here with astrophotography is, when you look at an object with your eye, it creates an image of that object in that instant, with reflected light that the eye absorbs, and that's how you see color and shapes, objects, all that kind of stuff. The reason why when you look at, say, a nebula through a telescope and you just see gray is the light is just processing that image in that instant. A camera collects light over a period of time. So if you think of light as little particles, almost like dripping water from a tap, if a dripping tap has a glass underneath it, you'll eventually fill that glass up with water. With astrophotography through a camera, you hold the lens shutter open for a period of time, and little photons keep dropping onto that camera's sensor, and it just builds more and more detail into the image. And that's why you get some fantastic colors, and great detail in the structures.
Cool.
So, what we're going to talk about now is really just the settings on the camera that kind of maximize its ability to gather that light. Um, the three things that I'll talk about in terms of settings on a camera are ISO, exposure time, and then your aperture setting or your f-stop. Are you familiar with any of those, Chris? Have you played around with them on cameras
Yeah,
before?
a little bit, a little bit, but boy, it's been a long time since I've really given much thought to that. Maybe one thing we should mention really quick is just about the difference between the, well, maybe explain the f-stop, but how that's different from a telescope, because typically with the f-stop and the focal length on the camera lenses, well, like the longer the number, the higher the power. So if you use like a really high number, like a 200 millimeter lens, you're zooming way in. But if you use like a 50 millimeter lens, you're kind of getting a real wide field. But with the telescope eyepieces, if you use like a low power is going to be like a 30 or 40 millimeter, and a high power is going to be like a 5 millimeter, say. So you just want to talk about the differences there really quick.
Yeah. So um, the 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 lower the number, so your lens focal length, like Chris said, if it's 50 millimeters, that will give you a wider field of view than say a 200 millimeter lens. But a 200 millimeter lens will give you essentially more magnification. But then there's also the f-stop on a camera, like f2, f5, and all sorts of numbers in between. And that's really just the kind of an aperture mask. So the lower the f-stop, the more light that's allowed through that lens. So if you have an f2, you're going to let an awful lot of light through that entire lens. If you have an f10, it's going to be a much smaller opening and very little light will pass through. Now, there's benefits to both. The more the key thing you're trying to do in astrophotography is gather as much light as you can with as few errors as possible in the photograph. Now, errors, there's a whole bunch of different errors that I'll talk about probably in the next 20 minutes or so. But when you run your aperture settings, say at f2, that's going to allow an awful lot of light through, which is what you want. The problem with running at f2 is almost the entire glass lens is exposed. And the issue with making quality optics is often at the edges of the glass. You'll usually have some degradation in the quality. So if you're using all of that glass, you're going to potentially introduce some errors into your image. And if you've ever noticed, say, wide field photography in particular, if you look around the edges of the photograph, you may see the stars are not pinpoints anymore. They might be kind of little elongated lines, or in some cases almost look like seagulls. And that's just errors in the glass. And the way you get rid of that is you change your f-stop. So maybe you go from an f2 to an f3 or 4, and then that will mask some of the errors in the glass. But the problem with doing that is you now are restricting some of the light coming through. So I think it's for every 2 factors of f-stop or something like that, you double the amount of exposure time required to gather the same amount of light, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a
Yep.
great explanation. Thanks for that. You did a much better job than I ever could.
so so really the rule here for aperture settings, so maybe I'll just back up one other thing. Between ISO, aperture, and exposure time, I like to call this the recipe. So everybody's going to have their own sort of recipe or settings that they like to produce the best possible image depending on their gear. So I'll tell you what I like to do in terms of my recipe. But when it comes to aperture or your f-stop, you want this set as low as possible without introducing a bunch of errors. So for my one wide field lens that I have, which is a 12 millimeter, about the lowest I go is f2.2. If I go any lower than that, the edges of my photograph starts to become really messy and I don't like it. So that's how it works for my camera. Now, maybe the next setting that I'll talk about is the ISO. And this is adjusting your camera's sensitivity to light. So it varies from very, very low, which you would use during the daytime. But for nighttime photography, you probably want your ISO anywhere from 800 to 3200, somewhere in that range. The higher the number, the more sensitive the camera is to light, which is what you want for astrophotography. Now, the conundrum here is the higher your ISO, the more noise the more noise that's introduced into your photograph. So if you have it set too high, you might almost start to seem or feel like you're introducing static onto your photograph. You'll see all sorts of little points of light that is false color and not actually a part of the image. It's just noise coming or being introduced into the photo from the sensor of the camera. So this is something you'll just have to feel out with your own equipment. I run usually anywhere from 800 to 3200. And depending on what I'm photographing, it might be 1600, it might be, any number in between there.
Cool.
Yeah. And then the last one here that I'll talk about in terms of the recipe is the exposure time. So again, the camera, if think about that dripping tap and a glass collecting water, you want to set that exposure time for as long as possible, holding that shutter open to enable the camera to gather as much light as possible. Chris, if you're on a tripod, just a regular old tripod with your camera, what is the problem if you set your exposure time too long?
Yeah, everything's going to get pretty streaky pretty fast as the Earth rotates. The stars are going to appear to form into long lines, long curving lines as they go around the North Pole or appear to go around the North Pole. Is that what you mean?
100%.
Okay.
So
good.
That
I don't know very much about astrophotography, but I did take some of those star trails. Is I think what the astrophotographers call them.
Exactly. Yeah. So this can actually be really beautiful. This could be exactly what you want if you're trying to create a photograph of star trails. But if you're not, this is the error or the conundrum for exposure time. If you hold that shutter open too long, you're going to lose your pinpoint stars. They'll turn into lines, and what you're capturing is the rotation of the Earth. Now, your maximum exposure time without a guided mount varies a little bit on the focal length of your lens. If you're doing really wide field photography, so again, my 12 millimeter lens, I can go about 25 seconds, 20 to 25 seconds for real tight pinpoint stars. And I can push a single exposure to 30 seconds. And it'll look pretty good unless you zoom in on some of the stars. You'll notice that they're starting to lose their pinpointedness. So that's the conundrum there. Now, if I just take a look at some of my recipes that I've done in the past, so some Milky Way shots that I've done down in grasslands. And it really helps to get to a dark sky for astrophotography, because if you're in a light polluted sky and you hold that shutter open on your camera, it's not just absorbing the starlight, it's absorbing the artificial light that's creating the light pollution as well. And it just washes out your image. But anyway, if you want to photograph the Milky Way, get to a dark site, you're going to need a tripod. So that's probably the only other piece of gear that you'll be required to have on hand. And that's just because your hand is too shaky to do any long-term exposure. So put your camera on a tripod, point it, at the Milky Way. And then what I've done for my stuff is I set my f-stop to 2.2. I set my exposure time to 25 seconds and my ISO to 3200, because in the grasslands, it's as dark really gets. So you can bump that ISO up quite high. And you've seen my photographs. They turn out quite well at that setting. At least I think so. You're able to see a lot of the structure within the Milky Way. And there's just so much detail that comes out of that photograph. It's really quite pretty.
Oh yeah, and yeah, you do a great job with the machine. It really is impressive, and I think I've often asked for your permission to use them in my talks and classes, and you even come to the class and taught people how to do this in real time for free. So I appreciate that too.
Yeah, for sure. Now the moon, let's say you wanted to photograph that, with your camera, it's quite easy to do as well. I still recommend a tripod. Again, your hand is just too shaky to really make that a viable option. But when it comes to the moon, you're really doing a pretty quick exposure because it is so bright. let me just see here. One of my settings was, oh, here we go. This was on one of my zoom lenses. So I had it, the focal length of the lens was 210 millimeters. My f-stop was 6.3. So compared to my Milky Way photograph that I took at f2.2, f6.3 is really restricting the light passing through the lens. But because the moon is so bright, it's okay. You're still going to end up with a really nice image. The exposure time on my Milky Way shot was 25 seconds. On the moon, I'm doing 1/320th of a second.
Wow.
Very quick exposure because, again, it's so bright. And then my ISO setting, again, the Milky Way was 3200. So I'm extremely sensitive to light. On the moon, I set it to 200. And it creates a really nice photograph of the moon where you're able to see a lot of the craters and the mare, and again, all sorts of other features that are visible there.
Cool.
Now, again, I really recommend that if you're going to get into this, try what I recommended, but then play around with your numbers too. Change your ISO, change your f-stop, change your exposure, and just see what you like. You might come up with some other settings that work really well for your equipment or just are more pleasing to your eye.
Cool.
So some other stuff maybe that I'll talk about too that is kind of fun to photograph. And we love it and we hate it. And it's the Aurora Borealis.
Oh yeah.
Why do we hate it, Chris?
Yeah, well, I never really dealt with the Aurora too much before I moved here, and it's really neat to see the first time. It's cool to see the second time. But like on that third or fourth trip out in the spring, when you've been so eager to get out and do some astronomy all winter, and then the whole sky is bright and you're not able to see through it for that brightness. It's almost like a natural light pollution in a way, preventing you from seeing the galaxies and nebulas and deep sky objects that we want to look at beyond it.
Yeah, it kind of ruins the visual astronomy.
It can.
However, if you have a camera, again, put it on the tripod. Wide field is what you need for the Northern Lights or the Aurora Borealis. And what I usually do is I set it to about f2.2. Actually, I basically use my my Milky Way settings. F2.2, ISO anywheres from 1600 to 3200, and then I'll do about a 20-second exposure. And what might be just kind of aurora that you can see with your eyes, but maybe it doesn't have a lot of structure or brightness. With these settings on a camera, this is where you pull out those bright, vibrant greens, curtains extending high in the sky, and you might even see some pinks and purples coming into the photograph. So you can really capture some beautiful northern light shots with just a basic DSLR camera, a tripod, and a wide field lens.
Yeah, you've gotten a few nice shots with them.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do some constellation shots. Again, basically the same settings that I mentioned for the Milky Way. You might want to use a medium range lens, like something in that 50 millimeter range. And, you can capture lots of different constellations with something like that. Orion is quite beautiful. You can start to get some of the nebulosity of M42 in the tip of the sword of Orion. Trying to think here. That's kind of the extent, I think, of my astrophotography targets that I've done.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can also do noctilucent clouds that we've mentioned.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Might as well mention that, eh?
Yeah. The other thing that I'll mention too is if you want to get into some really, really nice photographs of the Milky Way, the way to do that, well, there's two ways. And one way is you capture a lot of these 25-second photos, and then you go home and you stack them and you process them and do all sorts of stuff on your computer. Another way is you can buy these little tracking mounts that are very small and lightweight. They go on top of your photo tripod. They have little motors in them, and then you put your camera on it, and it compensates for the rotation of the Earth. So what this allows is some photographs that extend well beyond the 25 or 30-second threshold that I mentioned earlier. So these things can be purchased if you find a used one, probably you can get them for around $200 to $300. I think a brand new one is maybe around $400. They're very simple to use, and they've absolutely transformed my Milky Way photographs to something that is, closer to what you would see in a magazine or a book.
Okay.
So what I've done with my little tracking mount is same camera, but my recipe changed a little bit. So, using my 12 millimeter lens, I kept my focal ratio at the 2.2, or my f-stop, I should say. I changed my ISO though to 1600, but I increased my exposure time from 25 seconds to 3 minutes. And I've even gone beyond that to 5 minutes. It is incredible how much more detail and vibrant the Milky Way is at those settings. And because the mount tracks the Earth's rotation, you don't end up with any of those star trails. You end up with a beautiful photograph. And in some of my photographs, I've even captured some air glow, which, Chris, why don't you tell people what air glow is? Because for the longest time, I thought that it was an error in my camera and I was frustrated.
Yeah, I remember you
And
said, "Hey, what's wrong with my like what you were like complaining?" And I was like, "Oh no, that's because it's so dark where we are. You can actually see the air fluorescing. It's basically giving off a photon of light in a similar way to the aurora. It's similar. It's not exactly the same, but you're not having aurora, but the air or the air way upper atmosphere, the highest of the part of the atmosphere, will interact with the little bit of solar wind that's just always coming by to actually make it glow a little bit. And certainly that's what these new cameras are really good at picking up on, it seems.
yeah, they're that was amazing, actually, to be able to see that and understand what it was. Like I say, up to that point, I was a little frustrated. There's two more things that I want to cover off quickly.
Sure.
One, you mentioned that I often set up my camera kind of off to the side, and then I come back and do some astronomy while the camera is doing its thing.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, one of the accessories that allows me to do that is called an intervalometer. It's this little handheld remote, essentially, that plugs into the camera. It's a USB thing. And with the intervalometer, you can program the exposure time and how many exposures you want the camera to take. So what I'll do is I'll set up my little tracking mount with the camera on it. I'll program my intervalometer, say, to take 3-minute photos or 5-minute photos, and then I'll tell it to take 20 of those. I'll set it up, start that process, and I'll walk away. And then I'll come back, in an hour or 2 hours, and I'll turn off the camera. And then the next day I'll check out what photographs I captured. So that's the way to kind of set up a little bit of an automated process. Works really well. I highly recommend it. And the intervalometer also reduces vibration, because if you're actually pressing, say the camera button to open the shutter and start the whole process off, you're going to introduce a little bit of vibration, which is errors, which will be seen in your photograph. So the intervalometer just avoids that for you. The last thing that I'll talk about, and this might be one of the most challenging things that people have encountered if they've ever tried this before, and that's getting a nice focus, a nice tight, crisp focus. Most cameras, when you put it into the automatic settings, autofocus will work quite well for you during the daytime. But when you're trying to focus on the night sky, autofocus just doesn't work. It won't capture it. You'll have to do a manual focus. And there's nothing more frustrating than, say, spending a whole night of capturing photographs only to realize maybe at the end, or when you put your photographs on a computer, to notice that your focus wasn't quite right. The easiest way to overcome that is to buy yourself what's called a Bahitnov mask, Bahitnov. And it's this little plastic thing. They're very cheap, like $10 to $20 you can usually buy them for. It's this little plastic thing with a bunch of lines in it. You put it at the end of your lens or at the end of your telescope. You find a bright star and you take a photograph of it. And then you look on your camera display, and it's going to have like these kind of arcing starlight, lines coming off that bright star. And you basically, it'll be like an X and then another bar of light going top to bottom. The one you're looking at is that bar that goes top to bottom. It has to go directly through the middle of that X. If it's off to the left or it's off to the right, you don't have perfect focus. So what you do is you just keep making some small adjustments to your focus until you get that up and down line right in the middle of the X. And when it's there, you have perfect focus for infinity. Because that's the other thing. All lenses, when you do manual focus, they have an infinity setting, but I think every photographer knows that that's not really that setting really doesn't correlate to infinity. You have to back it off a little bit. So the Behitnoff mask is the best way I know of to get a crisp focus for doing astrophotography. And I think that's it. Did I cover everything, Chris, or did I
I
miss
think you
anything?
did. The only thing I was wondering about is maybe a few resources. Like we at the very start, we mentioned Alan Dyer briefly, and Alan is someone that you and I both know fairly well. He's come and spoken at the local club numerous times. Typically speaks at our star party. 'Cause he only lives just I think about 600 or 700 kilometers here, but he lives sort of He lives sort of about the same distance from where we often go observing, but just to the west of that as we do from these places. So we often do run into him, and he's one of the co-authors for the Backyard Astronomer's Guide. And Shane, did you find that to be a pretty good resource for getting started in astrophotography as an aspect of amateur astronomy? It's the Backyard Astronomer's Guide by Terence Dickinson and Alan Dyer.
Yeah, it is a really good resource. They have quite a bit of detail on astrophotography in there. Great place to start. Good recommendation for sure.
Okay. I think that's a fairly expensive book, but I think that was one of the first books I received as a gift on amateur astronomy when I was getting going. It's much larger now than it was back then when it was like not even an inch thick. Now it's 2 or 3 inches thick. The other thing I should mention is, I'm trying to keep this top of the mind, I was in a teleconference with Alan a couple weeks ago or 3 weeks ago now, and he mentioned to me that they've just submitted the edits for the most recent edition, if I'm recalling that correctly. So I believe there's a new edition of the Backyard Astronomer's Guide coming out very, very shortly.
Oh wow.
As we kind of get through this pandemic phase, he's been busy working away. So that's something that whether people are interested in astrophotography or other aspects of amateur astronomy, they can look for that book. The older ones, like I haven't bought one in a while. I'll probably buy the new edition because it's been a while since I bought one. Is probably just about one of the best resources on amateur astronomy. And then the other thing, I was just looking on his site because you mentioned his photos of the noctilucent clouds and that you've sent out a link. On his site, he actually has some links to some of his astrophotography books, and they're ebooks, and they're very affordable. He's a tremendously experienced astrophotographer and amateur astronomer. I was just looking, I think they're in US dollars, and the books were like $14.95 each. And then he also has some courses that you can purchase there as well, which are a little bit more, but he really walks you through that kind of stuff. Now, I haven't taken any of his courses or bought those books, but I do know Alan, and he really knows his stuff as well. I do know lots of people that have taken his courses in that. And usually he comes and gives those courses in person at the Saskatchewan Summer Star Party pretty much just about every year, doesn't he? I think that's...
Yeah, he's been there a number of times, and yeah, he's a wonderful astrophotographer.
Yeah, very approachable person, and boy, talk about experience both in the visual as well as in the astrophotography realm. So I mean, it is something somebody can do. You could start. I think he has lots of free videos you can download and watch as well. And you can certainly go onto his website and sort of garner a lot of information. But he is somebody you can come out to and meet. And it's one of those things where you come to a star party and you can sign up for a variety of different activities. But it seems very affordable considering what you're getting. I think pretty much probably just about pays for his gas to get there, kind of thing. So yeah. excuse me, yeah, I would definitely recommend to people to go to Alan's site. And even if you're not, like, I'm probably not going to take astrophotography up, although I've often thought about dabbling in the planetary side of things. But I frequently go to Alan's site just because I really do enjoy looking at those photos. And people can know this. It's amazingsky.net is Alan's site.
.com, isn't it?
Oh, okay. Sorry.
AmazingSky.com. Yeah.
AmazingSky.com. And he's got photos of a lot of the places that you and I go and observe at.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I like his latest images. He's got like a little section for the last 2 months of photos that he's taken.
Okay.
So if you go there right now, he's got a number of noctilucent cloud photos, which we've been talking a little bit about. So it just gives people an idea of what they look like.
Yeah. So he's done photos at the Old Man and His Back site that that we've set up as a nocturnal sky preserve it's right on the border of Alberta and Saskatchewan, and then the Cypress Hills, which is in the same general location, and then sort of on the Montana and Saskatchewan border is the very large and desert-like Grasslands National Park. He's done lots of photos there, and I did connect Alan with the museum down there. So when you go into the museum, once it's reopened, it's not going to be open this summer, is my understanding. But his photos form a large panorama that's on the wall of the museum. So that's pretty cool. And he says that that's pretty much his favorite spot to go and do astrophotography. And we've actually had like a big group of astrophotographers come down and taught them the nighttime sky. I remember that a few years ago, and we did a big session with them. Like, I don't know anything about astrophotography, but I can teach people the stars and constellations. And so we did that, and then they all took off in their vehicles and went off to various locations in the park at night and did a bunch of astrophotography. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. The key thing with astrophotography, if you're interested in doing it, is just get out there and start messing around. The beauty of digital cameras is the cost is basically, it's a sunk cost. You've already got the camera. It's just a matter of playing around and start capturing some photos.
Cool. Well, anything else you wish to add to this one, Shane? I really enjoyed it. It's really interesting to hear kind of the ins and outs of what you're doing when we're out there. I just really love those little tracking mounts that they've been making now. That's sort of the answer to the problem that I encountered early on, where I wanted to do some photos, but I didn't want to sort of quote unquote like wreck the night mucking around and looking down and turning a knob. And those kind of do all that for you. So you kind of are able to set it up and then go and enjoy some astrophotography.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is too, like relatively, they're inexpensive compared to, prior to these little tracking mounts, you would have to buy essentially like a telescope mount for your camera. And, you'd often be talking about something that is much more costly, much bigger to transport, and even more complex to set up. These things are so easy to set up. You really just point it north, make sure you have the right declination setting on there, which is just your latitude, and away you go. Very easy.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Jen. I really appreciate this, and look forward to seeing some great astro photos when we're able to get down to the dark sky here, hopefully maybe even as early as next month, as we've been talking about.
Fingers crossed.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.